How many versions of yourself did you bury just so you wouldn't be abandoned? It doesn't happen all at once. You don't wake up and decide to erase yourself. It begins quietly. A skipped opinion, a swallowed truth, a gesture you practice in front of the mirror until it fits their expectations. Childhood teaches you survival before it teaches you identity. So you adapt, you sculpt, you become someone. Someone who smiles at the right moment. Someone who stays silent when they want to scream. Someone lovable, but that someone is not you. Winnicott called it the false self, a psychological armor forged in the furnace of early fear. When love felt conditional, you learned the rules. Don't be too loud, don't be too sad, don't be too you. And every time you followed those rules, you were rewarded with safety, attention, maybe even love. But at what cost? Carl Jung said we all wear a persona, a mask created for the social world. It's not inherently wrong. We need it to function, to connect. But when the mask fuses with the face, when the performance becomes the person, something breaks, quietly, deeply, beyond repair, until it's seen. And Nietzsche, with his brutal clarity, whispered, "Become who you are." But how can you become anything real when every layer of your identity was designed not to be rejected? You walk through life not as yourself, but as the echo of who others needed you to be. A character, flawless, obedient, palatable. A script you wrote, not to be free but to be accepted. But now, something in you is tired. It's not depression, not exactly. It's the exhaustion of acting, the heaviness of pretending, the unbearable silence of living a life that feels rehearsed. You feel it most at night, when the distractions end and the truth returns. There, in the dark, the character you built starts to whisper, not for applause, but for release. What if you've been mourning the wrong deaths all this time, crying over breakups and failures, but never over the slow assassination of your own truth? What if the life you call your own is just the stage where your real self was sacrificed? Tonight is a funeral, but not for someone you loved, for the version of you that was created just to be loved. The persona that saved your childhood is destroying your adulthood. You didn't choose the mask. It was chosen for you, slowly, by necessity. When you were young, the world felt too big, too unstable. So you adapted. You listened closely to what earned approval. You memorized which parts of you brought affection and which ones brought silence, or worse, distance. You became fluent in pleasing others long before you knew how to speak your own name with certainty. At the time, it worked. The persona protected you. It got you through family dinners, school corridors, friendships built on unspoken transactions. You learned how to be liked, how to vanish just enough to not be a burden. It was survival, and it was brilliant, but now you're older. And the costume doesn't fit anymore. It clings, it chokes, it isolates. Jung said that the more we identify with the mask, the more the shadow grows in the dark, unseen, hungry, volatile. Because every time you smiled when you wanted to cry, every time you said, "I'm fine," with a scream buried in your chest, the real you, the wild, contradictory, human you, was pushed deeper underground. You became so good at being acceptable that you forgot how to be alive. And the irony is cruel, because the very persona that kept you safe is now the prison you can't leave. You feel it in your relationships, where intimacy terrifies you because it threatens the script. You feel it in your work, where success tastes hollow because it's not you who earned it. It's the version of you that was crafted to please. You've grown, but the mask stayed small. It's like wearing the outfit of a child in the body of an adult, nostalgic, familiar, but unbearably tight. And you wonder why you can't breathe. You are not broken, but the character you've been playing is collapsing. And maybe that's not the end. Maybe that's the beginning of your real life, the one that doesn't need a costume to feel worthy. You learned to perform. You became what they admired, polished, efficient, admirable. And with every step forward, you thought you were evolving, changing, improving. But deep down, something felt off, because all that growth, all that success, it wasn't built on who you are. It was built on a lie about who you're supposed to be. They called it ambition. You called it discipline. But it was survival. The praise felt good, like warmth in a freezing room. But it never lasted, because it wasn't meant for you. It was meant for the mask. You thought you were becoming someone, but you were abandoning yourself. Viktor Frankl wrote, "When life loses meaning, man seeks pleasure or power as anesthesia." And that's what happened, isn't it? The emptiness crept in. So you ran into distractions, dopamine, validation, anything to numb the ache of not being seen. You tell yourself you're lazy, unmotivated, weak, but the truth is simpler. You're not afraid of failing. You're afraid that if you drop the act, no one will stay, not even you. You don't procrastinate because you lack discipline. You hesitate because every action outside the character threatens the system, the identity, the fragile house of cards you built to feel worthy. That's why you freeze when it matters. That's why you sabotage the very things you say you want. Because to succeed without the character would mean admitting you never needed it. And that thought terrifies the part of you still clinging to the performance. So ask yourself, what are you really afraid of? Being invisible? Or being finally seen without the mask? The voice that sabotages you wasn't born with you. There's a voice in your head that never stops. It doesn't whisper. It interrogates, accuses, demands. It tells you that you're not enough, that you should have done more, that if you rest, you're wasting time, that if you speak, you're too much, that if you're silent, you're invisible. You've lived with this voice so long you assume it's yours, but it isn't. That voice was born in the aftermath of emotional bruises, in the quiet wounds of childhood, when eyes watched you with judgment, when affection depended on behavior, when mistakes meant love was withheld. It's not your soul speaking, it's your survival. Freud called it the superego, the internalized parent, the voice of inherited judgment. But that term doesn't capture its cruelty, because this voice doesn't just correct, it shames. It punishes. It corrodes. You weren't born criticizing yourself. That voice was planted, and what makes it more brutal is that it's dressed in your tone. It sounds like you. It uses your memories, your past, your fears, but its roots are not yours. They belong to the demands you absorbed, to the gaze that never forgave your softness, to the silence that followed your vulnerability. The tragedy is this. The mind builds a character, then punishes you for not becoming it 24/7. You crafted an image to survive, and now that image stalks you. Every time you slip, it's there, not to help you rise, but to remind you that you're failing to be someone you never truly were. You wake up already losing, not because you've failed, but because you're judged by a standard that isn't even real. And here's the paradox. You punish yourself for not perfectly performing a role that's slowly killing you. So stop. Not the life, not the dream, but the belief that this voice is truth. If you could take its words and say them to a child, what would you feel? Shame, disgust, grief. That grief is the part of you that still remembers. The part that knows somewhere beneath the layers that this cruelty is not who you are. The voice that sabotages you wasn't born with you. It was inherited, but it can be unlearned. The truth you've postponed for years. You don't see yourself as you are. You see yourself through the filter of who you needed to be to feel loved. Every look, every word, every silence you internalized. They sculpted a mirror. But the reflection it offers is not reality. It's survival. So when you look at yourself, you don't see truth. You see a projection, a necessity, a defense, the you that wouldn't be abandoned. That's why it's so hard to love yourself. Because you've never met the real you. You've only met the version built in response to rejection. When love was conditional, the self became conditional too. If they only valued your usefulness, you learned to be useful. If they only responded to silence, you learned to disappear. If your needs were too much, you learned to have none. And now, years later, you live in the shadow of that distortion. You question your worth not because you're unworthy, but because your mirror has been cracked by years of performance. Every time you failed to meet someone's expectations, another fracture formed. And now, even when someone offers real affection, you doubt it. Because you've been staring at a shattered image for so long, you assume the brokenness is you. It's not. But the mind doesn't heal through logic. It heals through recognition, through grief. Because the real tragedy is not that others didn't see you. It's that in the process of surviving, you forgot how to see yourself. So you keep repeating the same patterns, sabotaging what's good, clinging to what hurts, not because you want pain, but because pain feels familiar. Familiarity feels safe, and anything that threatens the false image feels like danger. You ask why you can't change. Maybe it's because change would mean confronting the terrifying possibility that the self you've presented all your life was never real. And underneath all that noise, there's silence. The kind of silence that feels like truth. The kind of silence that waits for you to stop performing long enough to finally come home. The grief no one warned you you'd carry. You've cried for love that ended, for people who left, for dreams that collapsed in your hands. But there's a deeper grief, one so silent it barely has a name. It's the grief of self-abandonment, the pain of having buried your own essence just to belong, of having amputated your instincts, your desires, your voice, to keep a fragile peace. It's not a loud pain, it's not dramatic, it doesn't scream, it whispers in your quietest hours, when the noise dies and the mirror becomes unavoidable. There's a sorrow in realizing that the life you mourned was never yours to begin with, that the losses you wept over were echoes of something much older, much deeper, the slow disappearance of the real you. You were not taught how to grieve that, because how do you mourn something you never fully knew? How do you cry for a version of yourself that never got to live? But the grief is there, in the dissonance, in the fatigue that has no physical cause, in the ache that doesn't match the facts of your life. It's the cost of pretending, of being loved for a role while the actor inside dissolves. Nietzsche said, "Man suffers more from the image of pain than the pain itself." And maybe that's true for you. Maybe it's not the pain itself that's unbearable, but the story you built around it. The performance you've sustained, so no one sees how hollow it feels inside. And the question returns, relentless. What image are you still performing today? If you could strip it away, not with rage, but with reverence, what would remain? Not triumph, not clarity, but a fragile, honest beginning. So if the tears come, let them. They are not weakness. They are the funeral hymn for the versions of you that died too quietly, that were never held, that were never even named. And maybe, in mourning them, you finally start to meet you. The risk of being real in a world that loved your performance. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. To be authentic sounds beautiful, until you realize what it costs, because the moment you stop playing the character, the charming one, the strong one, the agreeable one, the world begins to shift. Some people pull away, others stay confused, the approval fades, the applause stops, and suddenly you're no longer the version they loved. You're something else, something raw, unfiltered, human, and it's terrifying. Because being yourself might mean losing everything you gained by being someone else. Carl Jung wrote, "What you resist persists. What you accept transforms." But accepting yourself isn't an abstract idea. It's a slow death of illusion. It means facing the silence left behind when performance ends. It means realizing that some connections were never with you. They were with the role you played. You begin to understand that authenticity isn't light and liberation. Not at first. It's shadow. It's shedding. It's walking naked into a world that only knew you dressed in masks. The discomfort is real. You feel less charismatic, less likable, less understood. But what you lose in approval, you gain in clarity, in coherence, in peace that doesn't depend on applause. And that's the paradox, because what hurts the most isn't the rejection. It's the realization that you were never truly seen to begin with. So now you stand on the threshold of yourself, trembling, unsure. There is no script to follow here, no spotlight, no lines to memorize, only truth, only breath, only the quiet risk of becoming someone who no longer needs to be loved by everyone, only the wild, painful, sacred return to who you were before the performance began, the quiet that follows the character's final performance. There comes a night that doesn't feel like night. It feels like something else, not an ending exactly, but an unraveling. You sit in the dark, not out of despair, but because it's the only place where the noise finally stops. The voice, the demands, the rehearsed identity, all of it begins to lose its grip. You don't feel powerful. You don't feel healed. You just feel real. This is what remains after the character bows for the last time. No spotlight, no music, just breath, just the tremble of existing without pretense. For a while it feels like loss. You're not as charming, not as sharp, not as needed. You may feel invisible, but invisibility has its own kind of freedom. The kind that doesn't rely on performance to be worth something. Because now, for the first time, you're not auditioning. You're not trying to be chosen. You're not reciting lines written by fear. You're simply here and flawed, unedited, awake. The discomfort is real. You'll want to go back, to the applause, to the certainty of the mask. But you know too much now. You've seen the cost. You've counted the parts of you that had to die just to be loved. And now, you refuse to keep dying. You're not erasing your past. You're not declaring war on who you were. You're doing something far quieter and far more radical. You're burying what never truly lived. And from that burial, not a reinvention, but a re-emergence, a beginning that doesn't beg for validation, a presence that no longer needs to be decorated to be seen. Yes, the world may miss the character, but you won't. Rebirth is not a celebration, it's a solitary act. Carl Jung once wrote, "Becoming conscious is a painful process. It is like tearing the flesh off your soul." And maybe that's the best way to describe what's happening to you now. Not a breakthrough, not enlightenment, but an internal reckoning so raw it feels like rupture. This is not the rebirth they romanticize. There is no music here, no triumphant montage, no sudden clarity. Just you in the dark, realizing that everything you thought was you was scaffolding. And now that it's fallen, you're not flying. You're learning how to walk again, without applause, without validation, without a script. You look around and find that some people are gone. Some dreams don't shine anymore. The places you used to feel important now feel foreign. You don't belong in the old world, but you don't yet belong to the new one. This is the in-between. The desert between death and resurrection, and it hurts. But beneath that pain, something else lives. Something quieter, something older than memory. A self not designed to be loved, but to be whole. The character you created was never the enemy. It protected you, it bought you time, it gave you shape when you had none. But now, it's killing you. Slowly, elegantly. Like a beautiful lie that kept you warm while it drained your soul. And here's the final truth. The pain you feel today, that hollow, aching dissonance, is not failure. It's birth, messy, uncelebrated, sacred. You don't need to be understood right now. You don't need to be inspiring. You don't even need to be strong. You just need to remain one breath at a time. Because you're not lost. You're just tired of acting. And yes, it's still possible to become who you never had the courage to be.